The morning air was heavy with the scent of salt and rusted wire. Beyond the barbed fences, the Pacific shimmered like a mirror of molten glass. But to Aiko Tanaka, it looked distant, unreachable, like the life she once knew. She sat on the rough ground beside a bamboo hut, her knees drawn close to her chest, and stared toward the horizon where the rising sun failed to warm her face. Japan had surrendered. The words still echoed in her mind, hollow and final. For months she had tended to the wounded, whispered prayers for soldiers who never returned, and clung to the illusion that endurance would redeem the nation. Yet now her duty had dissolved like mist, leaving only silence. The camp around her pulsed with muted sobs and the clinking of tin cups. Dozens of women, most once nurses or clerks, moved with slow, deliberate gestures, careful not to show despair. Honor demanded restraint, even in defeat. Aiko's uniform, faded and torn, still carried faint traces of antiseptic and smoke. Her hands trembled when she pressed them together in her lap. She thought of her mother in Kyoto, who had taught her that a woman's strength lay in silence. Gaman, she reminded herself, endurance without complaint. Yet beneath the stillness her heart beat with the strange rhythm of disbelief. From the western side of the camp, a noise cut through the monotony. Laughter. Startling, unrestrained laughter. Aiko turned her head sharply. Beyond the fence, a group of American soldiers stood in the open field, tossing a white ball between them. Their movements were relaxed, their shouts light-hearted. One of them swung a wooden bat, the crack echoing across the camp like a gunshot of joy. The women nearby flinched, some lowering their eyes. To laugh so soon after war, it felt indecent. But Aiko could not look away. The ball soared high into the blue sky, spinning like a tiny moon before falling into waiting hands. She watched it disappear and reappear, her gaze following it against her will. "Don't stare," murmured Yumi Sato, a younger prisoner sitting beside her. Her voice carried both warning and curiosity. "They might think we're interested." "I am not," Aiko replied too quickly. Her tone was sharp, but her eyes betrayed her. "It's foolish to play while others suffer." Yumi tilted her head, her face thinner than her age deserved. "Maybe that's why they play," she said softly. Aiko said nothing. The thought unsettled her. She tried to turn away, but the sound of laughter lingered like music. She did not want to admit she found comforting. For a moment, she imagined her brother back home, tossing a ball in their small yard before he left for the front. She had never understood the appeal. Now she envied the freedom of that motion, the defiance of it. A gust of warm wind carried the faint smell of seaweed through the camp. Somewhere a guard shouted an order. Aiko straightened her back, forcing her expression into calmness. Shame still pressed against her chest, but something else flickered beneath it, a small, dangerous spark of curiosity. She looked once more toward the field, where the Americans laughed beneath the endless sky. She did not yet know that this sound, the rhythm of bat and ball, would become the heartbeat of her new world. If you want to discover more stories of humanity in war, don't forget to subscribe to the channel before we continue. The days in the Guam camp moved like waves, slow, repetitive, yet never truly still. The heat pressed down from above, turning the air thick with salt and sweat. Bamboo huts leaned against each other as if sharing the weight of exhaustion. Every sound seemed amplified: the buzz of flies, the distant surf, the clang of metal cups against ration tins. The women moved through their daily chores in silence, carrying buckets of water, mending worn uniforms, scrubbing wooden floors until their hands ached. Aiko Tanaka had begun to memorize the rhythm of survival here. The way the guards' boots crunched against gravel during inspection, the hour the sun crossed the central flagpole, the exact tone of the whistle that marked mealtime. She did not speak much, but others watched her quietly, sensing a kind of restrained authority in her posture. There were 47 women in the compound, most of them former nurses like her. At night, whispers passed between them like drifting smoke, rumors about repatriation, about letters that never arrived, about home. Aiko listened, but rarely joined. Hope felt dangerous. It required energy she no longer trusted herself to have. From beyond the fence came that sound again, The clean crack of wood striking ball followed by laughter. The Americans were playing baseball, as they did almost every afternoon once their duties were done. The game had become part of the camp's landscape, as permanent as the heat. Yumi Sato was the only one who dared to comment openly. "They play like children," she said one day, while wringing laundry beside the water barrel. "Do they not tire of it?" "They have the luxury to be children," another woman muttered, bitterness coating her words. Aiko looked toward the field, though she tried to make it seem accidental. The soldiers' laughter floated on the wind, carefree, unbroken. One of them, taller than the rest, tossed the ball into the air with an easy grace. His hair caught the sunlight, and when he turned, she recognized his face. Sergeant Harris. She had noticed him before, his movements precise yet relaxed, his gaze neither cruel nor dismissive. He carried himself differently, as if war had not yet hollowed him out completely. Their first real encounter came unexpectedly. Aiko was carrying a pail of water when a sudden breeze blew dust into her eyes. She blinked, momentarily blinded, and nearly stumbled. A shadow fell across her path. "You all right, miss?" The English words were slow, careful. His accent was soft, unfamiliar but clear. Aiko froze. Her heart thudded once, hard. She did not understand every word, but the concern in his tone was unmistakable. She straightened quickly, lowering her gaze. "Hi," she murmured, the single syllable all she could offer. Harris nodded slightly, stepping back. He didn't smile, but his expression softened before he turned away. Yumi, watching from a distance, whispered later that night, "He spoke to you." "What did he say?" "Nothing of importance," Aiko answered, though her voice betrayed a tremor she couldn't hide. The days continued, but now the space between their worlds felt less absolute. The fence still divided them, yet she found herself listening for his footsteps during patrol. Each evening, the sound of the bat striking the ball echoed through the camp like a heartbeat she could not silence. And though she told herself it was nothing, deep down she knew something in her life had shifted, as quietly as dust beneath the wind. The midday sun burned without mercy, flattening every shadow until the camp looked like a drawing scorched at its edges. The women moved slowly, conserving their strength. Aiko knelt near the laundry line, her hands submerged in a bucket of grey water. Around her, others murmured softly, their voices low, almost swallowed by the hum of cicadas. Then came the sound again, the rhythmic thud of leather and the sudden, satisfying crack of a bat. Aiko's hands paused. She did not look up at once, but her body betrayed her. Her shoulders tilted slightly toward the field. Across the fence, Sergeant Harris lifted a ball into the air and caught it with an effortless motion. The soldiers shouted words she could not fully grasp, but their laughter carried meaning enough. It was the language of ease, of men unburdened. "They play every day," Yumi said beside her, shaking her head in disbelief, "even when it rains." Aiko wrung the cloth tightly, forcing the water through the fabric. "Then they must be bored," she replied. Yumi smiled faintly. "Or happy." Aiko wanted to dismiss the idea, but her throat tightened. Happiness. It sounded like a memory from another lifetime. The ball flew high again, arching through the hot air, and she followed its path before she could stop herself. That evening, when the guards' laughter faded with the setting sun, a quiet conversation began among the women. "They say the Americans play that game to forget the war," murmured one of the older nurses, rubbing her wrists. Another scoffed. "Forget? They won." "What would they need to forget?" "They are still men," Yumi said softly, glancing at Aiko. "Maybe they lost people too." Aiko said nothing. The thought unsettled her. The enemy, feeling loss, it challenged everything she had been taught to believe. Yet something about the simplicity of that white ball moving between hands fascinated her. It was movement without violence, competition without hatred. Later that night, under the dim glow of a lantern, Yumi leaned closer to Aiko. "You watched them today," she whispered. "I did not." "You did," Yumi insisted gently, smiling. "Your eyes followed the ball, like it belonged to you." Aiko turned away, heat rising in her cheeks. "It is foolish," she said. "A game cannot feed us or free us." "No," Yumi agreed. "But maybe it can remind us we are still alive." Aiko did not respond. The words hung between them, fragile and daring. Outside, the camp had gone quiet, except for the whisper of palm leaves and distant waves. Somewhere beyond the fence, the soldiers' laughter replayed in her mind, looping like a song she could not forget. She lay awake for a long time, her thoughts circling the same forbidden image, the ball rising, falling, being caught again. She imagined what it might feel like to touch it, to hold something that belonged not to war, but to play. The idea seemed almost dangerous, yet strangely comforting. When morning came, Aiko rose before dawn. Mist drifted low across the compound, softening the edges of the wire fence. From the field, faint laughter echoed once more. She told herself she would not look, but she did. And when Harris threw the ball into the air again, she felt the faintest pulse of something she had not known in months: curiosity. The morning began with the same dull light, filtered through the mist that clung to the edges of the camp. Aiko was scrubbing the floorboards of the infirmary hut when she heard footsteps approaching. The air shifted, quieter, slower than usual. She looked up to see Sergeant Harris standing near the gate, his cap tilted back slightly, a white ball balanced in his hand. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The women froze mid-task, their eyes darting between the guard and the object he carried. Harris held it up as if it were harmless, then smiled faintly, though there was something uncertain in the gesture. "This," he said, his voice deliberate, "baseball." He pointed to the ball, then to himself. "We play." Aiko stiffened. The word meant nothing to most of the women, but they understood the intention. Several turned away, muttering in confusion. Yumi stepped forward hesitantly, curiosity shining in her eyes. Harris glanced at her, then looked back toward Aiko, as if expecting her to translate. When she didn't, he continued, motioning with his hands as though throwing the ball. "You try?" he asked. Aiko rose slowly, wiping her hands on her uniform. "Why?" she asked in careful English. "Why you give this?" He hesitated. "Peace," he said simply, then tossed the ball lightly in the air, catching it with a soft thud. "Maybe fun." The women behind Aiko whispered in Japanese, suspicion rising like static. "He mocks us," one said. "They play while we starve," another added. "It's a trick." Aiko's expression stayed composed, but her heart quickened. She didn't trust this gesture, didn't trust him, and yet the way he stood there, patient, waiting, did not match the cruelty she had braced for. Yumi stepped closer to the fence. "May I?" she asked Aiko softly, switching to Japanese. "You would take what he offers," Aiko replied. "It's not ours." Yumi's gaze remained steady. Perhaps kindness has no owner. Before Aiko could answer, Harris crouched and rolled the ball gently beneath the wire fence. It stopped at Aiko's feet, collecting dust on its white surface. The guards nearby watched quietly, uncertain whether to intervene. Harris straightened and said, "For when you're ready," then turned and walked away. The silence that followed was heavy. The women stared at the ball as if it might explode. "Don't touch it," one of them warned, but Yumi knelt, her fingers brushing the leather surface. "It's just a ball," she said. "Nothing more." Aiko watched her, torn between scolding and surrender. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "Put it away," she said. "Out of sight." Yumi nodded but smiled faintly as she lifted it, turning it over in her hands. "It's lighter than I thought," she murmured. That night, long after the lamps were dimmed, Aiko found herself thinking of the sound that ball had made when it hit the ground, a soft, hollow echo, neither threatening nor cruel. Something about it lingered in her chest, stirring memories she had buried beneath layers of duty and shame. She turned on her thin cot, eyes open to the dark. The gift remained hidden beneath Yumi's blanket across the room, glowing faintly in her imagination. Aiko closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "It's only a ball." Yet even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The sun dipped low, painting the camp in hues of copper and dust. Aiko sat beside the hut, her hands idle for once, her thoughts circling the white ball hidden beneath Yumi's blanket. For days, no one had mentioned it, though everyone knew it was there. The Americans continued their daily laughter across the fence, and each sound carried the faint echo of that offering, a gesture too confusing to name. That evening, when the others rested after dinner, Aiko found herself walking toward the fence. She told herself it was only to breathe, only to watch the sunset. But her eyes searched for the patch of ground where the ball had rolled days before. Yumi followed quietly, holding something behind her back. "You shouldn't be out," Aiko murmured. Yumi smiled faintly. "Neither should you." She revealed the ball, its surface now marked by fingerprints and dust. "I kept it safe," she said, almost shyly. Aiko hesitated, torn between fear of punishment and an urge she couldn't name. "Put it away," she whispered. Yumi tilted her head. "Maybe we can just see what it feels like." Before Aiko could answer, Yumi tossed the ball lightly in the air. It landed back into her hands with a soft thud. The sound startled both of them, a sound of life, not war. She laughed quietly, covering her mouth as if afraid of being overheard. "It's strange," she said. "So light, yet it feels alive." Aiko's voice softened. "Careful. If they see us—" But the warning came too late. A shadow moved beyond the fence. Sergeant Harris stood at a distance, leaning slightly against a post. The light from the setting sun caught the edges of his uniform, turning the dust around him gold. For a moment neither side spoke. Aiko froze, her heart hammering. Harris didn't raise his weapon or call out. Instead, he nodded once, then motioned with his hand, an underhand throwing gesture. Yumi looked to Aiko, eyes wide. "He wants to play," she whispered. "Don't be ridiculous," Aiko hissed. But Harris waited, patient. Then, with a slow and careful motion, he pointed toward Yumi, then at the ball. "Throw," he said simply, his tone calm, almost encouraging. Yumi looked at Aiko one last time, seeking permission she knew wouldn't come. She threw anyway. The ball arched awkwardly through the air, landing short of the fence. Harris bent, picked it up, and dusted it off. Then he smiled, a small, weary smile, and tossed it back, soft and true. The ball rolled to Aiko's feet. Yumi laughed, clapping once. Aiko glared, but the sound made something inside her shift. The laughter wasn't mocking. It was, impossible as it seemed, kind. She bent slowly and picked up the ball. It felt warm from the sun, smooth against her palm. For a brief second, she looked up and met Harris's eyes through the wires. They were steady, human. He gave a small nod, then turned away, calling something to the other soldiers. When he was gone, Yumi whispered, "You caught it." Aiko turned the ball in her hand. "Only to return it," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. That night, as the camp settled into restless silence, the sound of the ball still echoed faintly in Aiko's mind, soft, hollow, and full of something dangerously close to hope. Morning light spilled across the camp, pale and hazy after a night of rain. The ground smelled of wet earth and iron. Aiko was hanging washed clothes when she noticed movement near the fence. Sergeant Harris again, his boots muddy, a glove in one hand and that same worn ball in the other. He stood quietly, waiting until she looked his way. Then, with the patience of a man teaching a child, he pointed to the ball, then to his hand, miming a throw. "Throw," he said, his accent heavy but gentle. "Like this." He demonstrated, his arm cutting through the air in a smooth arc. The ball hit his glove with a clean snap. Aiko stared at him, unsure if this was mockery or kindness. Yumi, standing nearby, whispered, "He wants to teach." "Teach what?" Aiko murmured. Yumi smiled faintly. "A game, perhaps." Harris tossed the ball again, this time slower. "You try," he said. Yumi took a hesitant step forward. She caught the ball clumsily against her chest, laughing at her own awkwardness. The sound was light and startling, almost foreign to their weary ears. A few other women turned to watch. Harris grinned and clapped once, gesturing for her to throw it back. She did, the ball veering off course and landing short. He retrieved it, laughing under his breath, and exaggerated the motion again. "Arm high," he said, lifting his elbow. "Then throw." Even Aiko felt the faint tug of amusement. The soldier looked more like a teacher than a guard. When Yumi motioned for Aiko to join, she shook her head. "No, enough." But Harris caught her hesitation. "You," he said, pointing to her, his voice still soft. "Try." Aiko's pulse quickened. Around her the women watched, waiting. Refusing now would make her look afraid. She straightened, stepping toward the fence. "Only once," she said quietly. He nodded. "Once." He tossed the ball gently through the air. Aiko raised her hands, fumbling but catching it against her chest. The weight surprised her, light yet solid, alive with momentum. She looked at it, then at him. "Good," he said. "Now back." Her first throw was weak, the ball falling short and rolling toward the wire. Harris retrieved it, nodding encouragement. "Again," he said, smiling. "Stronger." The second throw was better. The third almost reached his glove. By the fourth she had learned the rhythm, the swing, the release, the satisfaction of impact. Something stirred in her chest, something she hadn't felt in months. Accomplishment. Behind her, Yumi clapped softly. The others whispered, their suspicion beginning to fade into reluctant curiosity. Harris wiped his brow, then pointed to the ball and said, "Tomorrow again." Aiko hesitated. "Perhaps." He smiled, understanding more than her words. "Good. Tomorrow." Then he turned away, leaving the women in murmured astonishment. Yumi leaned closer. "You're smiling," she teased. Aiko touched her lips instinctively. "No, I'm not." But she was. That night, as the camp settled, she replayed the memory of the ball leaving her hand, the sound, the weight, the strange peace it carried. For a brief moment, the fences had disappeared, replaced by a shared rhythm neither side could fully explain. Each morning after breakfast, the women gathered near the fence with an unspoken expectation. No orders had been given, no rules written, but the ritual had formed nonetheless. Sergeant Harris would arrive with his glove, sometimes joined by the younger soldier with a boyish grin whom Yumi had begun calling Jimmy. The language barrier remained thick, but baseball, oddly enough, spoke on its own. "Catch," Harris would say, tossing the ball toward Yumi, who was now the most enthusiastic student. She would shout, "Catch!" in return, proudly repeating the word as if claiming it. Aiko stood slightly apart at first, arms crossed, but her eyes followed every throw. When Harris pointed to her, she raised an eyebrow. "Again?" He nodded. "Always." Soon English words began to seep into the women's vocabulary. Throw, hit, run, safe. The simplicity made them easier to remember. They echoed them back across the fence, their accents thick but eager. Yumi pointed to the glove once and asked, "Name?" Harris touched it and said, "Glove," then gesturing to his chest added, "Michael." Yumi's eyes lit up. "Michael!" He chuckled and pointed to Jimmy. "James, but call him Jimmy." Aiko spoke quietly. "Aiko." Michael repeated her name slowly, then smiled. "Aiko." For reasons she couldn't explain, hearing her name in his voice sent a shiver up her spine, not fear, not pleasure, just awareness. As the days passed, they added more words. Ball, pitch, base, and even home. The women began to reply with their own. Yumi placed a hand over her heart. "Kokoro," she said. Michael blinked. Ro? "Kokoro," Aiko repeated. "Heart." He touched his chest in understanding. "Heart." They smiled. For a moment there was no war, no victory, no defeat, only people learning each other's sounds. One afternoon, while teaching how to swing a bat made from a carved tree branch, Michael mimed the movement, then offered it toward Aiko. She hesitated. "I'm not strong," she said. He shook his head. "No strong, just swing." Aiko gripped the bat. Her posture was stiff, uncertain. He gently corrected her stance, never crossing the fence but guiding with his words. "Feet. Here," he said. "Hands." "Like this." She adjusted. "Now." He nodded, stepping back. "Swing." She did. The stick cut through the air with a whoosh that startled her. The women clapped. Yumi laughed and shouted, "Kako-e!" Michael raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Cool," Aiko said quietly. Michael grinned. "Cool." "Okay." Later that evening, as Aiko sat beneath the palm tree near the hut, she rolled the ball between her palms and whispered each word to herself. Glove, swing, home. Each word built a fragile bridge. She wasn't sure where it led, but she stepped onto it anyway. Yumi sat beside her. "You're learning fast." Aiko looked at her. "So are you." Yumi nudged her shoulder. "Maybe one day we'll play a real game." Aiko didn't answer right away. She looked at the sky, the stars starting to appear in the humid dusk. "Maybe," she said, but even as she spoke, she felt it. Something shifting. The game had become more than distraction. It was becoming a language, one she never expected to want to speak. Aiko's fingers moved instinctively, folding clean cloth into precise squares as the sun filtered through the slats of the infirmary wall. Outside, voices rose and fell. English, Japanese, fragments of both, wrapped in the rhythm of a ball hitting leather. But inside her mind another sound took shape, a crack of wood followed by laughter, her brother's voice bright with boyish joy. She remembered the narrow yard of their Kyoto home, a soft spring evening when the cherry trees had just begun to bloom. Hiroshi stood barefoot in the grass, swinging a makeshift bat, while she sat on the steps, arms crossed. "Come on, Aiko," he called, "just once." "I'm a girl," she had answered with mock disdain. "Girls don't play silly games." He had grinned. "You're afraid to lose." She had thrown the ball with more strength than grace. He hit it anyway, sending it over the garden wall. Their father had scolded them for hours, but Aiko remembered only the thrill, the simplicity of that moment before the world became heavy. Now, standing in a prisoner camp on foreign soil, she felt the memory like a warm wind passing through her. "Are you all right?" Yumi's voice pulled her back. Aiko nodded. "I was just remembering." "Home?" "Yes, my brother." She hesitated. "He played this game, before the war." Yumi smiled. "Baseball?" Aiko nodded slowly. "He was obsessed. My mother hated it. Said it made him lazy, but he said it made him feel free." Outside, Harris's voice called something she didn't catch. A round of laughter followed, easy, unguarded. Aiko stepped toward the window. "I didn't understand it then," she said quietly, "but I think I do now." That afternoon, Harris brought a second glove. He held it up, showing its shape, its laces, then placed it gently on the ground near the fence. "For you," he said. "Play better with two." Aiko didn't move. "You take," he added, nudging it forward. After a long pause, she approached. Her fingers brushed the leather, old but well cared for. She picked it up, slid her hand inside. It was too big, stiff, unfamiliar, yet the feel of it sent a jolt through her. "Your glove?" she asked. He shrugged. "Mine, but now yours." She looked at him sharply. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because it fits." His words confused her, but she sensed the sincerity behind them. She gave a small nod. "Thank you." They played longer that day. Yumi practiced hitting with a stick, missing more than she made contact. The others began to drift closer, watching. One even laughed when the ball bounced off Yumi's shoulder. Later, as dusk painted the sky in bruised gold, Aiko lingered by the fence. "You look tired," Harris said. "Many chores," she replied. "But good tired," he smiled. "Same." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Do you have family?" His face shifted. "Had a brother. He didn't come back." Aiko looked down. "Mine too, Hiroshi. He vanished in Luzon." They stood in silence, not as guard and prisoner, just as people who had lost something irreplaceable. The wind carried the scent of the sea, and for a moment the world outside the fence faded. It wasn't the heat or the sound of the bat that signaled the change. It was silence, the kind that follows the sudden arrival of someone out of place. Colonel Daniel Harper stood at the edge of the compound, his posture rigid, uniform spotless despite the dust clinging to the boots of every other man. His eyes scanned the gathering near the fence, Japanese women laughing, awkwardly tossing a ball, and 2 American soldiers smiling as if they weren't on the edge of history's bloodiest war. Aiko saw him first. Her spine straightened instinctively. Harris turned, caught the colonel's gaze, and his own smile disappeared. That evening, Harper summoned Harris to the command tent. "You've been busy," the colonel began, voice cold, arms crossed. "Teaching our prisoners how to play catch." Harris kept his tone level. "It's baseball, sir." "I know what it is, that's not the point." Harris didn't flinch. "With respect, sir, it's just a game. It helps keep the peace, makes the days go faster for them and us." The colonel stepped closer. "They're not your friends, Sergeant. Don't forget which side they were on 6 weeks ago." "I haven't forgotten," Harris replied, eyes steady. "I've just seen what happens when we treat people like animals." Harper's jaw tightened. "That's not your call." Harris hesitated, then nodded. "Understood, sir." But as he left the tent, something in him resisted. He wasn't disobeying orders yet, but he also wasn't ready to return to the cold silence that war demanded. The next day, the women waited, ball in hand, faces expectant. But Harris didn't come. Jimmy passed by briefly, offered a small wave, and moved on without a word. Aiko felt it immediately. Something had shifted. The rhythm had been broken. Yumi looked to her. "Do you think we did something wrong?" "No," Aiko answered quietly. "We did something human." Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The guards, once indifferent, now lingered longer during patrols, their expressions unreadable. By the 3rd day, the ball lay untouched in the dirt. The glove remained under Aiko's cot. Laughter faded, replaced by the scrape of chores and the sound of distant waves. That night Aiko sat alone, her thoughts heavy. She missed the game, not for the rules or the motion, but for what it had given her. A pause, a breath, a moment in which she wasn't defined by her surrender. When she heard footsteps behind her, she didn't turn. "I can't stay long," Harris said softly. She looked up, surprised. "The colonel?" He nodded. "Warned me off. No more games. No more talking." Aiko's hands curled in her lap. "Then why are you here?" He hesitated. "Because I needed to say. I didn't regret it." She searched his face, then said, "I didn't either." He looked away. "I wish it were different." "So do I." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they weren't allowed to say. He gave a small nod. "Take care of the glove, it's yours now." Before she could reply, he turned and disappeared into the dark. Aiko sat there long after, her heart heavy, the sound of the sea rising behind her. But deep inside, the rhythm of the ball remained. The silence that followed Harris's absence settled like ash. The air in the compound turned still, thick with what couldn't be said aloud. The ball remained untouched, though Aiko sometimes caught Yumi glancing toward it like one might glance at a friend left behind. Then, one morning before dawn, the silence broke, not with shouts or gunfire but with laughter, faint, muffled, almost cautious. Aiko rose from her mat and stepped outside. In the soft gray light, she saw Yumi in the clearing between huts, crouched low, holding a stick like a bat. Another woman pitched the ball gently. Yumi swung, missed, and laughed. "What are you doing?" Aiko whispered sharply, her heart racing. Yumi turned, eyes gleaming. "Practicing. Are you mad? If the guards see—" Yumi stood straight, brushing dust from her hands. "Then they see. I'm tired of being silent." More women emerged from the shadows, drawn by the sound, by the defiance. Aiko felt torn between fear and something warmer, something that had flickered in her chest ever since she first caught the ball. Aiko didn't speak. She simply walked over, picked up the glove from under her cot, and joined them. Their field was nothing but compacted earth between laundry lines, but it became sacred. They played before the sun rose, before orders began. They used sticks for bats, makeshift bases from folded clothes. Their throws were wild, their catches clumsy, but their laughter, quiet, breathless, was real. Jimmy was the first guard to notice. He didn't shout, he didn't report. One morning during a supply run, he passed Aiko a paper-wrapped bundle. "From someone who misses the game," he said with a wink. Inside were 2 real gloves and a smoother ball. Aiko looked at him. "He sent these?" Jimmy didn't answer, but he tapped the side of his cap and walked off. Practice became routine. Word spread quietly. The women coached each other, learned to cheer in whispers. Yumi made up chants in broken English and taught them to the others. One morning, while Aiko tossed the ball with precise, confident movements, she noticed a shadow near the edge of the compound. Harris stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She froze. He nodded once, barely visible, then continued walking. That small gesture lit a fire in her chest. He hadn't abandoned them. He was watching. By the end of the week, they had enough rhythm to form 2 teams. No uniforms, no crowd. Just women in faded clothing playing not to win, but to remember what freedom felt like. Yumi stood on third base, dirt on her knees, smiling like a child. Aiko pitched with focus, each throw cleaner than the last. When the ball flew high into the air and was caught by one of the women with both hands, the cheer that erupted was soft, but electric. No orders had changed. The colonel still watched from a distance. The war hadn't vanished. But in that dusty yard, under the rising sun, the women had reclaimed something. It wasn't a rebellion of weapons or words. It was a quiet defiance. A refusal to be only what the war had made of them. They were prisoners. But now they were also players. The morning broke clear and windless, the sky above Guam stretching wide and blue like it had been scrubbed clean overnight. For the first time, the camp felt alive with anticipation. Not fear, not rumor, something else. Aiko tightened the twine that held the makeshift bases in place. Nearby, Yumi adjusted the cloth belt wrapped around her waist, giggling as she tugged on her stitched-together pants. Their uniforms were patched together from scraps, old linen, rice sacks, even a dyed hospital sheet, but they wore them with pride. The field was uneven, dotted with rocks and tufts of stubborn grass. It was hardly a field at all, yet it held purpose. The American guards had gathered, curious. Jimmy stood behind first base, glove in hand, and Michael, Sergeant Harris, stood near the back, arms folded. His expression was unreadable, but Aiko saw something flicker there when she caught his eye. Colonel Harper was also present, standing stiff beside a jeep, arms behind his back. No orders had been given. No one had stopped it. That was enough. Yumi took her position behind the makeshift plate, squinting at the sun. Aiko stepped up to bat. Her stick wasn't perfect. Its bark had been worn smooth from practice, but it felt solid in her grip. Jimmy pitched, not too fast, not too easy. Just enough challenge. Aiko swung. The crack of wood against ball sent a shiver through the crowd. It rolled through the dirt, past second base. Yumi screamed with laughter, running as fast as her legs would carry her. Aiko sprinted. Cheers rose, soft at first, then louder, from both sides of the fence. What followed was chaos. Barefoot runners stumbling over rocks, the ball bouncing unpredictably, women tripping, recovering, laughing. One of the prisoners, Keiko, caught a fly ball with her bare hands and shouted something in rapid Japanese that made the women erupt in applause. The Americans clapped too. Even the guards smiled. Yumi pitched next, and with each throw, she yelled out an English word she'd memorized. Fast! High! Safe! Her pronunciation making Jimmy laugh so hard he missed the ball. Aiko watched it all from the edge of the field, her hands resting on her knees, breathless. The sun warmed her skin, and for once, she welcomed it. After 3 innings, the score was long forgotten. No one kept track. There were no winners, no losers, just players. Michael approached quietly as the women rested under the shade. You did well, he said. Aiko nodded. They did. You too. She looked at him. I didn't think they'd allow this. He shrugged. They didn't stop it either. Aiko watched the other women, their faces bright, eyes shining with a kind of joy she hadn't seen in months. "I don't think we're prisoners right now." He gave a soft smile. "You never were. Not in here." He tapped his chest. She didn't reply, but the words stayed with her. Across the field, Yumi called out, waving a hand. "Again, one more inning." The sun kept rising, casting long shadows across the dust. And for a while, in that strange makeshift diamond, the war faded, and something else, something older, freer, took its place. A game. A moment. A kind of peace. The rain came without warning. One moment the sky was calm, pale and cloudless. The next the air thickened, darkened, turned electric. The first drops fell like pebbles, sharp and cold. Then the wind shifted, sudden and furious, tearing through the compound like a warning shot. Aiko had just finished folding blankets when the storm hit in full. The wind howled, slamming the flimsy bamboo walls, sending dust and debris into the air. Women shouted, scrambled for shelter. Yumi grabbed Aiko's arm. "The laundry!" "Forget the laundry," Aiko shouted back. "Get inside!" But it was already too late. Rain crashed down like a wall. The roof of the infirmary sagged under the weight, then split, water pouring in like a broken pipe. Across the compound, one of the storage huts collapsed with a dull thud. Screams followed. A guard ran past, waving his arms toward the center of the camp. "The supply tent!" someone yelled in English. "Help me!" Aiko didn't hesitate. She ran into the open, slipping in the mud, arms stinging from wind and grit. She reached the fallen hut and saw Harris already there, soaked through, pulling crates out with both hands. His face was cut along the temple, but he kept moving. "Aiko!" he shouted over the wind. "Grab the bandages!" She didn't question how he knew she would come. She just dropped to her knees beside him and began pulling items from the debris: gauze, iodine, rolls of linen. The rain turned the dirt into soup. Their hands slipped, dug, braced. Another woman, Keiko, stumbled into the scene, followed by Jimmy, his cap gone, hair plastered to his head. "This one's breathing," Keiko shouted, dragging a younger woman from beneath the rubble. "Get her inside," Aiko yelled. "Careful with her leg." Harris looked at Aiko. "You take the others. I'll finish here." She met his eyes. "You'll be buried if that roof gives." "I'll be fine." She hesitated, then turned and ran, guiding the injured toward the infirmary. Inside, women moved quickly, instinctively. The old training returned, the war nurse within them reawakening under pressure. They wrapped wounds, dried limbs, braced splints. No one asked who was friend or enemy. An hour passed, then another. By the time the worst of the storm cleared, the camp looked changed. The field was destroyed. Base paths now muddy rivers. The backstop collapsed. But no one cared. The sky began to clear slowly, blue bleeding through the grey. Harris sat against a crate, exhausted, hands filthy, eyes distant. Aiko brought him a strip of cloth. "You're bleeding." He touched his head absently. "Didn't notice." She dabbed the wound gently. "You should have stayed in shelter. So should you." They looked at each other, both drenched, both shaking slightly. "I'm glad you came," he said. She nodded. "I didn't come for you." His smile was faint. "I know." But they both understood. It didn't need to be said. The storm had torn through the walls, the routines, the small fragile rhythm they had built. And yet, as Aiko looked around at the women helping one another, at the guards sharing tools and bandages, she felt something stronger than devastation. They had endured. Together. And in that, there was something unbreakable. The days after the storm passed in strange quiet. The laughter that once echoed from the dusty field no longer filled the air. Repairs were made with minimal supplies, walls patched with tarps, roofs tied down with rope and prayer. But something else was being repaired too, slowly, quietly. Word arrived that repatriation was beginning. Some prisoners had already been moved from other islands. Japan was no longer a battlefield. It was ashes and memory now. The announcement settled over the women like fog. They would be going home. Aiko sat beneath the palm tree, the glove resting in her lap. She didn't wear it anymore, but she refused to store it away. Its leather was scuffed, darkened with salt and sweat, and still held the faintest scent of the field where she had learned to laugh again. She held a pencil stub and a folded piece of paper. The lines were straight, each character written with care. But the letter would never be sent. "Michael, I don't know if this will reach you, perhaps it never should. But I want you to know something simple. Thank you." She paused, chewing the pencil. So many things were tangled inside her that words struggled to hold them. She continued, "You taught me more than a game. You reminded me that survival is not the same as living. That even in captivity, the soul can move. You didn't fix me. You didn't try. But you offered something I never thought I'd see again, dignity without condition." She hesitated again. "I'll be returning to a broken place. My country is shattered. My family is gone. But I no longer carry shame in silence. I carry memory. I carry kindness." She folded the letter carefully, pressed it flat, and tucked it into the pocket of her uniform. It didn't need a stamp. It only needed to exist. Later, she approached Harris during one of his rounds. His uniform looked cleaner now, as if the war had washed off in layers. "I heard you're leaving," he said quietly. "Soon." He nodded. "You'll be safe?" "I don't know." There was a silence that held too much. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the baseball he'd once given her. The stitching was frayed, the ink faded. "I want you to keep this," he frowned. "It's yours." "No," she said. "It always belonged to you." He held it in both hands, staring down at it. "Will you write?" "There's nowhere to send it." He looked up. "Then just remember." She nodded once firmly. "I will." That night she slept with the letter beneath her mat, not as a message, but as a record. A chapter, a truth that would remain hers even after departure. As the camp prepared for transport, she walked the edge of the field one last time. The dirt was dry again. The wind had returned. The bases were gone, but she still saw them, where Yumi had stumbled, where Keiko had caught her first fly ball. It had been more than a distraction. It had been a season. And like all seasons, it had to end. The ship that carried them back to Japan smelled of oil and rust. It rocked gently under grey skies, moving through waters that seemed endless. The women stood at the railings, watching waves rise and break, their expressions quiet. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared. Aiko kept her hands clasped behind her back. The baseball glove remained in her satchel, worn but whole. The letter to Michael stayed folded in its envelope, unopened. She hadn't cried when they boarded. She hadn't looked back at the island. There was no point. What had happened in Guam didn't belong to any place. It lived inside her now. Tokyo was a husk when they arrived. Buildings were skeletons, streets were cracked and colorless. Smoke still drifted in the distance, and the air carried a bitter scent of ash and iron. Aiko walked through the remnants of her old neighborhood, past what used to be her family's gate. It was gone. Nothing remained. No voices, no laughter. She stood before the empty lot, staring at where her home had once been. She did not weep. She sat down on the edge of the curb and placed the glove beside her, the fingers curled upward like a sleeping hand. A woman from the neighborhood passed by, recognized her, and gasped, "Tanaka Aiko?" Aiko stood, bowed. "They said you were dead." "Not yet," Aiko answered softly. The woman touched her arm gently. "There's a school now, for children who lost everything. They need teachers." Aiko didn't hesitate. "Where is it?" 2 weeks later, she stood before a room full of orphans, faces tired beyond their years. They didn't smile at first. They didn't speak unless spoken to. But Aiko understood that silence. She wore it once herself. She began with lessons in reading, in math, in writing names. But one afternoon, as sunlight poured through broken windows, she placed a ball on the floor. The children stared. "What is that?" a small boy asked. She picked it up. "This," she said slowly, "is how I remembered I was alive." She brought the glove the next day, then a stick carved from a tree limb. She cleared space behind the building, made lines with chalk and string. They played badly. They tripped, laughed, shouted too loudly. It didn't matter. Each time the ball hit the air, something lifted from their faces: fear, hunger, sorrow. One girl approached her after class. "Sensei, were you always good at throwing?" Aiko smiled. "No, I was terrible." "Who taught you?" She looked up at the sky. Someone unexpected. In the evenings, after the children had gone, she sat on the steps and held the glove in her lap. She traced its stitching with her thumb, remembering the sound of dirt underfoot, of Yumi's laugh, of Harris's voice calling out, "Swing!" War had taken everything from her. But it had also given her a stranger's kindness, a broken ball, and a reason to teach children how to smile again. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you," to no one and to everyone. Decades passed. Seasons changed and returned. Cities rebuilt. Names faded. But some things, small, quiet things, remained. Aiko Tanaka, now in her late 70s, sat on a wooden bench in a Tokyo park, a blanket draped over her knees. The cherry blossoms had begun to fall, dotting the ground like pink snow. Children ran through the grass, chasing each other with laughter sharp and bright, like bells ringing in clear air. Beyond the benches, a baseball game was in full swing. The players were young, no older than her students had once been. Their uniforms were clean, their caps too big, their joy uncontained. Aiko watched every pitch, every swing, every stumble with calm reverence. Her hands rested gently on her lap, fingers curled around a faded baseball. The leather was worn smooth, the seams almost gone. Written across one side, though now barely legible, were the letters, "Aiko, 1945. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds wash over her. The thump of glove against ball, the scrape of cleats on dirt, the sharp cheer of "safe" from the first baseline. For a moment she heard another voice, deeper, foreign, familiar. "Nice swing." She opened her eyes slowly. No one had spoken. Just memory, looping like an echo inside her. Beside her on the bench, a boy sat down, out of breath and holding a bat. He looked at the ball in her hands. "Did you used to play?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes glinting. "A long time ago." He grinned. "My grandma says girls didn't play back then." Aiko smiled. "Your grandma was wrong." He laughed, then stood. "You should tell her that." "I just did," she replied, and the boy ran back onto the field. She remained there, heart full and still. It hadn't been a grand story. No medals, no parades, no headlines, just a field, a fence, a ball passed between hands that once pointed guns. But in that moment, long ago, a choice had been made, to throw instead of turn away, to listen instead of obey fear. It had made all the difference. As the game wrapped up, one of the players called for another round. "Let's go again," Aiko whispered to herself. "One more inning." Then she stood, slowly, carefully, and placed the ball beside her on the bench. She didn't need to carry it anymore. It would wait for someone else, someone ready to catch. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and continue exploring the power of humanity, even in times of war. Click the next video to keep watching.